Hello, thank you for being with us. My guest today is Donna Schuurman. She is the Senior Director of Advocacy and Training at the Doggie Center, which is a place I absolutely admire here in Portland, Oregon. Thank you so much for being with us, Donna.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Paula. Thank you for inviting me.
Can we start talking about what you do and what the Doggie Center does?
Sure. Well, the Doggie Center was the first program of its kind in the United States, possibly the world. We started back in 1981, working with children as young as 3 and up through young adults and their adult caregivers or parents, family members who have experienced the death of a family member, or in the case of teens and young adults, it could also be a close friend.
Mm-hmm.
About 7 or 8 years ago, we added groups for families who have someone with an advanced serious illness in their family,
Mm-hmm.
ALS, brain tumor, and we do grief support groups every other week throughout the year that are by age, 3 to 5, 6 to 10, young teens and young adults. There's a
Mm-hmm.
concurrent group that meets for the parents or adult caregivers. They meet for an hour and a half every other week for as long as they want to, as long
Mm-hmm.
as someone wants to participate. Not unusual for families to participate 15 to 18 months, some less, some more. There's no prescribed amount of time. Everyone grieves differently.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no charge for the families. We're a nonprofit supported by the community. So
Yes.
since about 70% of our families have had a father die,
Really? So mainly
yeah,
fathers. Wow.
well, maybe 60%
Mm-hmm.
father, and then maybe 20 or 30 mother, and then the rest is, death of a child, a sibling, or a
Mm-hmm.
friend.
Mm-hmm. And
And
it's interesting that you mentioned that you have groups for those who have, for example, parents who have terminal illness, because that's grief
yes,
too. We tend to think about
yes,
grief as just the final thing after it's something that starts when someone dies, but it's not, isn't it? It's a
right,
process, isn't it?
right, right.
Well, Donna, I thought we could talk about childhood grief today
Mhm.
because I have heard from so many parents over these many years that I've been working with grief and especially suicide grief, but they never know what to do. So they have
Mhm.
a child, and should I talk to them? Should I tell them? Should I explain about this? For example, should they participate in the ceremonies? And it's a very hard decision, and parents with the best of intentions, sometimes they overprotect these kids, which can get in the way, I believe, of their grief. So can we start with that? Can you
Oh,
talk to parents and say, okay, here's how we should or we could think about grief and help our kids go through it?
yeah, I first want to acknowledge something you said, Paula, that I think is really important, which is it's not easy. No one wants to have to say to their child, your father died, your brother, sister, your teacher, even, your cat or dog died. It's not
Mm-hmm.
easy. So I want to acknowledge that up front. And we always want to protect our children
Mm-hmm.
from pain to the best of our abilities. However, death is a fact of life. And the sooner that we can help our children understand that not everything lives forever, not every person, not every animal, the better. So I suggest that people use early examples, a bird, a dead bird, a dead pet, or whatever, to talk about that everybody has an end to their life. The real key issues are, number one, to tell the truth,
Mm-hmm.
because children, when they find out, or if they find out that they're lied to, then begin to question everything else you're telling me. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
whether to believe you or not.
Yeah.
And with young children, to tell them in concrete ways using language that they can understand. They'll have lots of questions. Let them ask the questions, answer them honestly. And if they sense that you don't want to answer them, they'll stop asking them. They'll just kind of go underground. They won't stop wondering.
Which doesn't mean that their grief is done, right? It's
No, it
just
just
buried.
means Exactly. Or they can tell from the response that they get that, oh, I'm not supposed to talk about this
Mm.
because it makes dad sad or it makes mom cry or whatever. So be honest. I mean, I just say that the easiest way to say something is, I have some very sad news, and just say,
Hmm.
you know,
And acknowledge the emotion. It's a sad news.
yeah,
It's sad
this is
news.
sad news, and I wish I didn't have to tell you this, but, and then just say whatever happened. Daddy died today, or,
Hmm.
you know, depending on what history they have. If they knew the person was ill and back and forth, you would share it in a slightly different way. As you know, mommy had cancer,
Hmm.
and the doctors were trying to make her better, and it got too bad and they couldn't make her better from the cancer, and the cancer took over and she died.
Hmm. You just said she died. I have a question for you because I have done so much research on this and I've never gotten an answer.
Hmm.
When do kids know that death is irreversible?
Well, it depends on their experience. It depends culturally. For example, like
Mm-hmm.
kids who grow up in rural areas on farms, for example, understand death typically a
Oh,
lot
that's a good
earlier
point. Yeah.
than some other kids, if they've had a personal experience, all those kinds of things. I think, even, I mean, 4 or 5 year olds probably don't know for a fact that it's irreversible, or like, well, I know you said daddy's dead, but will he be dead all day?
Mm-hmm.
Or when is he coming back? Or people
Yes.
say things that make it confusing,
Uh-huh.
like, your sister's with God now. And I'm not suggesting in any way that that's not okay to say. I'm
Yes.
just saying, also make it clear that they have died,
Yeah.
because it's like, well, God had her long enough, I want her back now.
Yeah, and we go back to the point that you started. Use concrete words
Yeah,
because, as you said, you may say, "Oh, he passed away," or "She passed away," and then the child may just wait for them to come. It's okay. When are they coming back? Because
yeah.
it's just not concrete enough. So
And I
they
think
have
being
to understand.
being very concrete to say, when people die,
Mm-hmm.
they can't, their bodies don't move anymore. They can't see us, they can't hear us. I mean, with little kids, I'd say, like, they can't laugh, they can't poop, they can't cry. We
Mm-hmm.
can't see them anymore
Mm-hmm.
because they have left their body.
Mm-hmm.
So they're, struggle to
The,
understand what that means, but ultimately they do.
Yes, you just reminded me of such a powerful image in one of your videos online. This little, I think she was 3 years old, blonde,
Hmm.
very cute, beautiful girl. And she actually had difficulty saying the words because she was so young, but I thought it was so poignant. And she said, "I wanted to sing the ABC with my mom." And then she stopped singing, and then her body stopped singing.
Yeah.
And then there is a beautiful moment in the video when the facilitator says, um, yes, and then what happened?
Hmm.
So she was actually trying maybe for her to express emotion. And she said, yeah, I have a bad feeling, something bad happened. I had a very bad feeling.
Yeah.
So it actually let her express her
Yeah.
emotions. How important is it for the kids to actually talk about their emotions?
Well, some kids are talkers and some kids aren't
Mm-hmm.
talkers. So kids who aren't real verbal aren't going to suddenly become verbal. I think what's more important is to find ways to express their
Mm-hmm.
feelings. So some of that happens through talking, but a lot of it happens through play, through
Mm.
expressing what they're thinking through play. And I love to play with 2, 3, 4, 5 year olds. And I
Yeah.
just let them boss me around and tell me.
Mm.
And if you let them do that, you'll
Mhm.
find out what they're wondering about. They'll start assigning you roles. You're the doctor and I'm the sick kid. And I'll say, okay. And then you just go with it. And that's how
Mm.
you find out what they're wondering about.
So a
I
little
think
bit
that,
of play therapy.
yeah,
Yeah.
just play. Play is
Hmm.
their therapy, so
Yeah,
to
because
speak.
that's how they express themselves, right? So
Exactly.
it's not necessarily verbal. It's not the verbal expression, but find a way, depending, of course, the parents will know who their kids are. Find a way that for them, that's the way they express, maybe drawing, maybe singing, or.
Yeah, and maybe throwing things safely.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of children that we see who are, say, 3, 4, 5, they're angry. Like, I want my mom back. Well, I would be
Mm-hmm.
angry too. And so what we have to help them see is it's okay to be angry, but it's not okay to bite people. It's not okay to
Mm-hmm.
kick your
So
brother.
boundaries, yeah.
Yeah, but to say, you know what? Here's a thing we could do when we're really angry. And you could say, we're going to throw Nerf balls or little balls at the wall. Or
Mm-hmm.
we have a room at the Doggie Center called the Volcano Room. And it's really
Yeah.
just an emotion expression room
Mm-hmm.
to get these things out of your body.
Mm-hmm. So the volcano room is the one for anger, right? When they can
No,
throw
no,
stuff? No,
it's not actually anger.
not
It's
for that. Oh, okay.
just energy,
Oh, energy.
energy and
Okay.
emotion. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
just anger.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that they aren't keeping it in their bodies,
Oh, okay.
you know?
Mm-hmm. I also saw that you have a hospital room. I
Yes,
thought that was so symbolically important because
it
many of the
really,
kids, that's some of them, that's what they went through for months sometimes, right? And
yes,
years.
yes. And what's interesting, so we have a hospital that donated, a pediatric hospital
Mm-hmm.
bed and lots of supplies. And what happens in there is, it's so interesting. The children don't ever really want to be the patient. They want to be the doctor or the nurse that makes you better.
Mm, to
And it's about,
cure, about
control
healing.
and feeling empowered again when you feel helpless and powerless, to have
Mm-hmm.
control over something.
Mm-hmm. Do you work with art too? Is art
Oh yes,
important?
very, very. So we have several art rooms. We have a splatter paint room. We have clay and art, all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of art materials, mostly non-directive. Like, there it all is. You do what you want to do with it. Sometimes we'll have art therapy students, for example, lead maybe a mask making exercise or something. But more often than not, it's allowing the children to choose the mediums they want to work through, whether it's painting, clay, um, you know,
Mm-hmm.
glitter, all kinds of just materials for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about rituals? This is another question that I see many times. Should they participate in the funeral, in the wake, or should they have a voice, or should they have at least the choice of going or not?
Yeah. I'm a big advocate of informed choice.
Mm-hmm.
So not being forced to do things you don't want to do, and not being uh, not not being allowed to participate in things you might want to do. But kids don't necessarily know what those are.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I had a friend who died. She had a 5-year-old son. And what we said to him was, we're having people are getting together because they loved your mom. And what we're going to do is show pictures of her, and some people will be crying. We're going to play music she loved. And the floors in the room are brown, and the walls will be
Mm-hmm.
blue. And the more we could prepare him, he came in, he's like, yeah, the walls are blue. So it was
Mm-hmm.
not foreign. And he had an opportunity during it to speak if he wanted to. And he came up and talked, took the microphone. It was really amazing. His father was
Wow.
shocked.
Because it was something that he was prepared for. He
Well,
knew what was
he,
expected.
he didn't think his son would talk, but
Huh.
he said it shocked him. And I said, ask him why he did it.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, she was my mom and I loved her, and other people talked about her and I wanted to talk about her too.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about the parents' grief? I mean, how much of it should you share with kids?
Well, I think they're taking their cues from us as parents, and
Mm-hmm.
it's okay. I think what's not helpful is like to go in a room, cry, come out looking like you've cried, but pretend nothing's wrong. It's
Because
it's
they
better
know.
to, yeah, because they know, and then they're like, oh, it's not okay to share this. To say, I was having a memory today about your brother,
Mm-hmm.
and it made me sad because I was thinking about how much he liked vanilla ice cream on a hot day like this, and how we can't have it with him again. But we could have some and remember him. You know, do you
Mhm.
want to do that? And I think it's important to keep them out of the problems of things if they're as much as possible. Like, we're taking care of things, but we're all going to be sad sometimes, and that's okay. And we want to be able to remember him or her and say their name and
Mhm.
share memories together, even if it makes us sad. Some of them will make us happy.
Hmm. What about saying goodbye? Because rituals, they have a value, and I think they have a place in healing when it
Yeah.
comes to grief. Let's say they don't go to the funeral, they don't
Hmm.
participate, and they didn't have maybe a chance to say
Hmm.
goodbye. Is it important to maybe create a ritual with the child?
I think it can be really helpful. Again, they're not going to necessarily know what those opportunities or options are, but we've done some of that with children at the Doggie Center, for example, who a parent died in another state. Maybe the parents were divorced. They weren't able to travel to the service, or there wasn't a
Hmm.
service. And it's like, well, you can have your own service. Like, what would you do if you could do one? And do it with them. Have them, whether it's photos, drawings, music. Um, I think about it as punctuation of life events,
Hmm.
and death is one of those life events that when we have that coming together and we have that punctuation of it, it happened. Um, it just, there's something about those kinds of rituals that are important.
Hmm. I was thinking now about more of teenagers, for example, because we're talking about choice and giving them space to
Hmm.
express their feelings. And teenagers, they tend to keep it to themselves and isolate themselves, staying in the room. So when do you know that you maybe have waited too long? And if they're not expressing at all, they're not talking about it. I mean, when should it be the point for a parent to say, okay, listen, we need to talk about this?
Yeah, I would, again, every teenager is a little bit different, but I would look for other behaviors if there are concerning behaviors, changes. So I've
Mm-hmm.
had parents say, like, my son won't talk to me about how he's feeling. And I'm like, well, did he talk to you before this happened? No. Well, he's not going to now, then, most likely. But to say, I want to make sure that I'm doing everything that's best for you. Do you have friends you can talk to? But what I would be looking for is changes in behavior, like a teen who cared about how they looked and now doesn't, or
Mm-hmm.
isolates from friends, or is secretive, or is drinking, or, radical changes in behavior. And as a
Risky
parent,
behavior, yeah.
yeah, and I would say to my child, like, I've never gone through this before either. And I'm not a teenager right now. And I don't want to bug you, but I also care. Can you
Mm-hmm.
help me know how I can best help you? What are the things that I could do that would help you the most? And
Mm-hmm.
they might say, just leave me alone. I'll talk about it when I want to. So be it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And to just say, well, I am going to check in every now and then. Is that okay? Can I do that?
So again, just give them space and choice.
Yeah. Choice,
Mm-hmm.
space, let them know you care, but don't force them.
Mm-hmm.
I have a good friend who died actually 2 years ago tomorrow, uh, of suicide, jumped off a bridge here in Portland.
Mm-hmm.
And her son was 11 at the time, and I was there um, when we told him. And, he asked the questions he wanted to ask when he was ready for the answers. And I told him, I want to be one of those adults in your life that you're not avoiding because every time I see you, I'm making you talk about it. You know,
Yeah.
he started self-isolating from adults. Like, everybody wants to know how I feel all the time. Just leave
Mm-hmm.
me alone.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be like while driving, he would start talking about how he felt. Or let's go hit some golf balls at a golf range, take a walk, ride bikes. Let's do normal things. And I took him skiing this year, and he the drive there, he talked the whole time, and I never asked him how he was doing. And I think as parents, we also need to not over push them, because we'll push our teens away from us if we push too hard.
Yeah. You just talked about suicide, so let's dive into that. Because do you find that the grief, from your experience at the Doggie Center, that there are differences in grief when it's suicide?
I think so. And, some of it is societal, that families
Mm-hmm.
tend not to get as much support as they would when someone dies of suicide, that they would if the person had died in a car crash or of cancer. So that's a larger societal piece and a stigma that's often attached. I think it's harder in some ways for bereaved people because they feel sometimes like it could have prevented, like the if onlys may be heightened.
Mm-hmm.
They might be there with cancer, like, why didn't we go to the doctor sooner, or why did I let them take the car? But they're heightened when there's a suicide death because we relive it, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
more of like, was there something more I could have done? Did I miss things? Should I? If onlys, what ifs?
Mm-hmm.
And those are really haunting. And there aren't magical answers to them. But the thing that I say that I believe truly is common in every suicide death is that the person's perception of their emotional pain outweighed their ability to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And those of us around can say, but I was here for you, or I would have if you'd only made a call. But the person wasn't able in their pain to perceive options of getting out of their pain other than to die.
Including reach out. I interviewed someone from England the other day, and he was telling me that he actually he did all the planning, and he left a letter to his daughter. He left, and he was going to do the same, to jump off a bridge. In all on the way, then he said, and he told me, Pauline, I sat down, I had my phone in my hand, and the whole time I was hoping that someone would call me.
Yeah.
And then I thought, wow, 7 billion people in the world, and nobody knows the pain I'm experiencing right now. And he kept on postponing and just waiting for that phone to
Yeah.
ring. So it just shows. But then he said, I started thinking about my daughter, and he started reliving my life and waiting for that phone to ring, and I realized, you know what, I have a lot to live for. And he
Hmm.
said, after that, my perception completely changed.
Hmm.
But it's this idea that it's not just the pain, because that's mostly what's happening. It's not about dying, but it's about ending that pain, that
Yes.
moment. And he said that after that, life just was transformed, because he suddenly
Yeah.
realized that I do have things to live for. I'm
Yeah.
not ready for this yet.
Yeah.
And
I think
he's,
you make an important point there, which is I don't think most people who are suicidal want to die. They
mm-mm,
want to get out of pain.
no. Yeah, they want to get out of pain. And even when they do want to end life, they want to end that specific life they're
Hmm.
living. So
Hmm.
sometimes if you change it, and if you make
Hmm.
some changes, you can actually save a
Yeah, and they
life.
can't always see that, and that's where
Mm-hmm,
friends and family, and
mm-hmm,
even then, I mean, my friend who jumped off the bridge, I a week before she died, I said, you have 20 people you could call any time of the day, and any of us would be there in a split second, and we love you. And she said, I
mm-hmm.
know, I know. And you know I
Yeah,
think also Thomas Joyner, who's written a lot about
yeah, I've read his
suicide.
books. Yeah.
The thing that one of the things that I think I appreciate is that sometimes people who are suicidal think that they're a burden to other people,
Mm-hmm,
the perceived burdensomeness, and like people will be better off without me. And we all wish we could bring our friend back to say, we're not better off without you. We
mm-hmm.
loved you. We want you
No, yeah.
here. Your son needed you.
Mm-hmm. That's
Um,
one aspect of suicide that I think it comes with the stigma too, and the misconceptions we have, is
mhm.
that it's selfish. It's
Yeah.
actually altruistic sometimes. They do
Yeah.
believe that they'll be
Yeah.
better off. And I can say that from my own case, my dad, after 2 days before he took his life, he wrote me a letter, and that's how he started. And he posted the letter, and that's how he started. I'm sure you'll be better off without me.
Yeah.
And that is so common to see in suicide
Yeah.
notes.
It's very frequent. And again, it's a misperception. It's the person's pain is overwhelming their ability to see and to really take in that love and to see a future for themselves. And
Mm-hmm.
people who have been suicidal and lived, um, we do learn a lot from, to say, well, what keeps you alive now?
Mm-hmm.
And it's things like hope, love, being
Connection,
connection,
purpose.
giving back. Yes,
Purpose is so important. And as you
yes,
just said, giving back.
yeah.
So, do you have groups for, do you separate it at all, or is it just
Yeah,
grief itself? Or do
no,
you
we
have
do.
suicide grief?
We have over 450 families, so 70 different groups happening. We divide them by age, but also death of a parent, death
Mm-hmm.
of a sibling. And then we also have specific healing after a suicide death. They don't have to go in that group. If they had a death of a parent, they could go in a death of a parent group.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have those specific groups, unfortunately, also for homicide, after a homicide death. And so
Mm-hmm.
I would say most of the families who start out in a general group of a death of a parent or a sibling who've had a homicide death, a murder or a murder suicide or a suicide death, um, tend to move to the more specific groups because they don't want to be the only one in that group that
Mm-hmm.
has had a suicide death or
Mm-hmm.
a homicide death.
Donna, how do you explain to a child? Because this is, I saw again in one of your videos online, and it was just so moving to me. A young boy, maybe he was 10, I don't know
Mm,
his age, but he was talking about his dad's suicide, and he saw it. And it, to me, it was so touching because he actually did that, and then he took the gun and he shot himself in the heart. He actually
yeah,
did this,
yeah.
which was so powerful. So how do you explain to kids, because the issue of choice, how can you
Mhm.
explain to a child that your father chose to do this or
Yeah.
your mother chose to do
Yeah,
this?
I don't use that terminology.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if it's a choice of someone who is not able to think clearly
Mm-hmm.
at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So um, sometimes people have health problems, physical health problems that take their lives. Their heart's not working right, and we
Mm-hmm.
didn't even know it. They're out jogging and they just die. We have other people who have problems with their heart, and we know it, and they get better. Or we have people who have problems with their heart, they go to the doctors and they still die. Sometimes people have emotional uh, problems or problems in their lives that feel overwhelming to them. And
Mm-hmm.
so they become in a different kind of pain, like emotional pain or uh, psychic. I love Edwin Schneidman.
Schneidman is my
Yeah,
idol. I
I really
love
like
him.
that terminology. It's not used
Yes,
very
it's
often,
like
but
no, but it's
an
psychic.
ache
Yeah.
of the psyche. It's not just a brain problem. It's more
Mm-hmm.
than that. But you can say that someone was in a different kind of pain, emotional pain,
Mm-hmm.
and that pain took over. It got bigger than they could handle. And so to get out of the pain, they took their life. They
Mm-hmm.
jumped off a bridge. They took too many drugs. He shot himself.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually,
Do you have to be concrete too when it's suicide? Do you?
well, not initially. So,
Mm-hmm.
you say he died. Sad news, he
Okay.
died. When they ask how, tell them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And don't give any more detail
Of
than
any
they're
age,
asking for.
would you tell a child of any age it was?
I would, yes, I
Okay.
would, because here's why. They're going to hear it from other people.
Okay.
Even to the best of our ability, they are going to hear it. Now, I would try not to go into grotesque detail around it,
Of course. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I would say, she jumped off a bridge. I'm not going to say what bridge yet, unless you ask.
Mm-hmm.
But, she
Yeah.
died. How'd she die? She jumped off a bridge.
Yeah, yeah, it's interesting you're saying this, and I'm thinking about I have a a nephew and a niece. So my niece was 5 when my father died, and I remember maybe 2 years after that, when I wrote the book and I published a book about about my father's death, and she asked me, "Oh, you have a new book? What is it about?" And I said, "Well, it's about suicide prevention." And she was 7, I think, and she said, "What is suicide?" And I went, wow, that was the first time I had to explain to a child what
Yeah.
suicide is. And actually, I used some of your words. I talked about emotion. It was too much for him. He was sad. He was having problems. So I went more to talk more about what he was going through at the time. And then the other experience I had, that until today, I think it's just amazing that it happened in my family. When I have a book published about this, is my nephew, when my father died, maybe 10 years later. This was like 5 years ago. He's 21 now.
Hmm.
And I was at home with him talking, and we were talking about smoking for some reason. And he said, you know, Aunt, I would never smoke because of what happened to my granddad. I said, you need to my dad? He said, what do you mean? He said, yeah, that's why he died. Or that's how he died. He had lung cancer, right? And I just looked at him and said, what? This was like 10 years after my dad died,
Hmm.
at least 10 years. And I said, what do you mean? He didn't die of lung cancer. Who
Hmm.
told you that? And he said, well, my mom told me, my grandmother, because he didn't live with us. He lived in another
Yeah.
state. And
Yeah.
I said, no, that's not how he died. And I explained to him, and he was so shocked.
Yeah.
And this isn't in my family. And I work with this, and nobody had ever talked to him about
Yeah.
this.
Well, that's the piece of, we think we're protecting them by withholding that information, but we're really not protecting them, because they're going to find out.
Mm-hmm.
And, and then it's like, well, why did you lie to me? And what else have you not told me? Or what else have you lied to me about? That's what that
Mm-hmm.
sets up.
Mm-hmm. Donna, I have two more questions.
Okay.
One is, when can a parent identify that their kid is having a problem with grief? Maybe they're not expressing, or the way they're expressing. How the signs that you briefly talked about?
Yeah. I mean, I think I look for real changes. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's hard to tell sometimes, because a parent will say, well, I don't know if he's just being a teenager or if it's his grief. And it's not that simple to separate it out. But if they're withdrawing, if they're angry all the time, if they're not in contact, like have cut off friends, if they're become incommunicative with you, or have shown no motivation at all over a period of time. I'm not saying just moments of that, because moments of that are normal responses, natural
Mm-hmm.
responses. But isolating, separating.
And what should they do if they do identify those
Yeah,
signs?
well, I recommend that they contact and I use this word, it's important, qualified mental health professional, because there are a lot of people out there who have degrees but no training in grief and loss. And I could write an encyclopedia on the stories I've
I
heard
can
from
imagine.
families.
I can
Yeah,
imagine. I have heard some horror stories too.
yeah, of bad advice that they've been given by people with, supposedly with master's degrees or doctorates, or even psychiatrists. So what I would do is recommend, ask the person what their training is, how they approach grief, and how they would work. It's okay to interview your therapist. Can I have 10 minutes of your time to find out if
Hmm.
this is the right fit for us?
Hmm. Yeah.
And
And
yeah,
I think when it comes to suicide, even more,
yes,
because there is a lot of stigma. There's a lot.
yeah,
It's a taboo, and some people do. I heard a story that until today was one of the worst stories I've heard of a family, and he was having depression. He was in his 50s. He was experiencing depression very badly, and he went to a psychiatrist, and who saw him for a few months. And one day the psychiatrist called his daughter and said, can you come? I want you to participate in a session because I need to talk to you. So here's what he said, because at that point, the father was already talking about suicide. So he told the girl, You know what the problem is with your father? He's spoiled. He's always had everything he wanted. He doesn't know how to deal with frustration. It gets worse. So he said he doesn't know how to deal with frustration. He never heard a no in his life. And he keeps saying he's going to kill himself, and he might. And you know what's going to happen? Your brother, who was 1 year old at the time, is going. He might even do the same because your father did it. And I cannot treat him anymore.
Wow.
Can you imagine? This is a
No,
doctor, a
no, I can't.
doctor.
A
When she
psychiatrist.
told
Yeah.
me, I said, no, this is like the top of the worst stories I have ever
Yeah.
heard in
I
my
mean,
life.
that person should lose their license.
Yeah. I asked them, did you file a complaint about this? No, because you know how it is. They're in pain. They're desperate. They're trying to save their dad's life. They
Yeah.
just go to the next, right?
Yeah. Well, there are a lot of therapists who, if you express suicidal ideation, don't want to see you anymore.
Yeah. It's,
And that's just when you need that. So,
yeah.
but there's not good enough training out there. It's not required training for people to get masters and doctorates in helping professions, and it should be.
It should
And there's
be
more drive.
mandatory.
Yeah.
Should be mandatory, I think, because
Yeah.
you will have a patient with suicidal thoughts.
Exactly.
It's inevitable.
Well, also, most therapists are not trained in grief,
Hmm.
working with families who are grieving a
Yeah,
death. So they're kind of learning it on the fly, and it ought to be required, because that's why people go to seek help because of losses of all kinds.
yeah. But again, you talked about society. We are not supposed to talk about grief. It's something we put in a drawer, close
Yeah,
it, and get over with, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Even our idea that only old people die in their sleep at home peacefully, and very few people actually die that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's quite rare. Well, all I can say is that some people do have the Doggie Center. They're fortunate enough to have you,
Thank
to
you.
have your team.
Thank
And I
you.
can't wait until this stay home thing ends so I can come and visit.
Yes, please do. It would be a real pleasure.
I want to end with one of the activities that I've seen on your website. It gives you at the beginning of a sentence, and I would like to finish with you doing this
Okay.
exercise.
Okay.
The first one is I wish.
Oh, I wish we could be more loving to one another and more caring.
And I hope.
I hope that people will be able to take something from our conversation that is helpful to them in some way.
I'm sure they will. I'm sure my audience will learn a lot from you. Thank you so much, Donna. Have a
Thank you.
good day and keep yourself safe and at home.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.